Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Welcome, everyone, to Sports Spectrum. It is our last podcast for 2019. Happy New Year's Eve, heading into New Year's Day in 2020. And today's guest on the podcast, we're really excited to bring to you our first women's soccer coach to the podcast, and he is Kevin O'Brien. He is the Lipscomb women's soccer coach, came to the team around 8 years ago, and he's been doing great things with this program. In 2018, they won their first ever Atlantic Sun Tournament championship, and then this past fall, in 2019, they repeated as Atlantic Sun Tournament champions, and we talk about that with Coach Kevin, just the idea of achievement and winning the tournament title. But Kevin talked about how the last few years have been a culmination for him on trying to build a program that is an intentional faith-based soccer program at the highest level, at Division I in college. And Kevin's doing a great job with that and talks a little bit about the struggles of getting to that point and wrapping that identity up not in soccer, but in something greater, meaning his faith in Jesus Christ. He has a great testimony as well, Kevin does, of coming to the Lord in his early 20s and really how that changed everything for him and how he goes about soccer, how he goes about life, and certainly how he goes about coaching. And he also talked at the end of the podcast about developing relational depth. That's a quote from him, developing relational depth in his walk with the Lord and in his journey as a coach. He's the real deal. Kevin O'Brien, Lipscomb women's soccer coach, our last podcast here in 2019. Take a listen to the story of Kevin O'Brien here on Sports Spectrum. Coach Kevin, welcome to Sports Spectrum.
Thanks, Jason, for having me.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you, Coach. Glad to have you on the show. The first women's soccer coach we've actually had on Sports Spectrum. And looking at your season, it was a pretty good one. 2019, you guys ASUN tournament champions back in the NCAA tournament. I know you repeated and you won in 2018 as well. But let's talk about this year, I guess, for starters. What was unique and special about this team of maybe all the teams that you've coached here in 2019? What was this year like?
Yeah, it was. It's always a challenge when you have success and you win a conference championship. You go to the NCAA tournament. Repeating is sometimes the greater challenge. But yeah. I knew right away, just kind of the leadership that we had in the team, that they weren't going to be satisfied with just one, and they set it out as their goal. It's like, hey, we're not going to defend a championship this year. We're going to go attack another one, and they had that mindset all spring, all summer, and came into preseason ready to go, and it was awesome.
That's great. Now, you mentioned to me earlier before we started taping about 2018 and how special and unique that was, winning it for the first time, the ASUN championship, the Atlantic Sun tournament title, and getting that tournament berth. Take us back to 2018 and kind of what took place there that really set the pace and the mindset for you as a coach in the program that you wanted to cultivate.
Yeah, well, so for me, you have to go back even further. So I took the job at Lipscomb 8 years ago and really felt the Lord kind of put it on my heart, like, hey, you can have a viable Division I sports ministry where you are glorifying God to the highest and really, really competitive at a high Division I level. And so when I took the job, I set that out as my goal, like, hey, I'm gonna see if we can make this thing work. And it's just been amazing because it took a lot of time, a lot of recruiting, a lot of casting the vision of what we could be and what the Lord could do at a place like Lipscomb. And the beauty of the 2018 championship is it was the culmination of years of hard work, years of girls committing to something that, the program hadn't had any success. And it quite honestly was floundering before they got here, but they bought in to what we could be, and they captured that vision, and the Lord kind of ran with it in their hearts. And, to then ultimately achieve a championship, which is what in sports your end goal is for every team in every sport. It was just really, really special and gratifying because we weren't putting it at a win at all cost type approach. It was, hey, let's serve the Lord with our gifts and abilities. Let's use the field as a place of worship. And God can do amazing things when you make that your focus, when you make Him your focus. And so it was just amazing, and grateful to be able to have a part of it.
What were some of the rhythms, disciplines, things that you sort of, instilled into your team to keep the main thing? Obviously you want to win, and you're coaching soccer, so you want to make sure that they're doing the best they can as soccer players, but really cultivating an atmosphere, a rhythm, I guess, of seeking the Lord first. What were some of the things that you would help instill into your players to do just that?
Yeah, well, so it's unique at the Division I level to find a team that is gonna worship together. That's gonna pray together. We've gone on a mission trip every year, the 8 years that I've been here. So we've kind of been integrating each and every year, sports ministry training. Hey, what's it like to be a competitive athlete, and to have a greater goal of glorifying God in a really tough soccer environment, right? Where you got people tackling you hard and pulling your jersey and maybe cutting corners. And what's the biblical response to these kind of things? So we talked through that. What identity, significance, all these things that are real in our journeys as athletes, and kind of through preseason, throughout the season, we'll continue to bring it up. Like, hey, this is how the game played out. How do we respond to that? If a game didn't go well, it's not my style to begin with, to be a yeller, screamer, that kind of thing. It's like, no, let's process how we get better as soccer players, but ultimately always know that in the end, it's just soccer. This isn't the most important thing in our lives. And the crazy thing is, as you make these players who maybe have had soccer as their idol all their lives aware that, like, hey, it's just a game. This is a game where we can glorify God, and I think He wants us to do our best, and we want to play with excellence and give everything we've got. But in the end, if we lose a game, it's just a game. What I found, I should say, or what I think most people would find if they coach to that end, is that the players begin to play in freedom and in joy, and they're not playing with fear, which can make them diminish, their capabilities as players. But when they're playing in freedom and joy, you're going to get the best out of them. And that's kind of what I think I've realized as a coach. And I know a lot of other coaches that listen to this podcast will have experienced that as well. But man, for me, it was the special sauce to our success.
So with that comes trials, difficulties, valleys, as we all go through, not just in our spiritual journey, but I'm sure even as a coach. So what is, in your mind, the toughest part of being a coach, and being a coach for a soccer team like at Lipscomb? What's the difficulties there? Obviously, it's not a bad thing per se, but everything comes with a difficult season or just things you have to go through. What are some of those for you?
Yeah, I think for me individually, it's probably going to be the same as the players. It's what's your identity wrapped up in? If it's wrapped up in results, well, then your life could look like a roller coaster. For the players, if it's wrapped up in playing time or whether I'm a starter or not, your life can look like a roller coaster. So for me, kind of getting them to understand that, hey, who you are on the field should be the same person you are off the field, that there's got to be congruence in your life. And when you find that congruence, man, it kind of makes processing the difficulties of sports so much easier.
Kevin O'Brien, Lipscomb women's soccer coach, is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. So, as I mentioned, you're our first women's soccer coach, but let's learn about your journey, I guess, a little bit. Soccer, was that always first in the blood of Kevin O'Brien growing up?
It was all the way through high school. I had a good college soccer career. I played at a little place called the College of Charleston, but It was a mid-major that had a lot of success. We went to multiple NCAA tournaments when I was a player, captain of the team, but wasn't following the Lord at that time, and graduated, got drafted to play after college. And it was really my second year as a pro that I came to know the Lord at the age of 22. So up until that point in my life, I was playing like many athletes do, for myself. And it was a complete shift of, okay, now that I'm serving the Lord with my life, what does it look like in competitive athletics? And I had the good fortune of being invited to be a part of the Charlotte Eagles, which is a sports ministry that's operated by Missionary Athletes International. The base that I was playing out of was in Charlotte, North Carolina, and ultimately was surrounded by a bunch of guys, 25 other guys that love Jesus. And, they kind of set the example for me, this young new believer who didn't know left from right. I was kind of just a sponge in that environment, and, seeing sports ministry play out in front of my eyes, even though I was probably the worst of the worst on the team, I was able to learn from those guys, and each guy was just a wonderful example of, okay, this guy's got an evangelistic heart, and the way he loved people was amazing. And whether this teammate was just an incredible servant to the way he served his team. And it was so countercultural to everything I'd ever grown up being a part of. It blew me away. So I was able to sit under the leadership of great godly men and see these other guys that were far, superior in their faith. And I guess I should say I'd been walking with the Lord for a lot longer. And that was, for me, kind of what started it all and kind of set me off on this journey of faith in my own life, and faith integrating and marrying that with sport.
So what did you see change, though, in you? We always say, it's a heart change. It's a lifestyle change. It's so many different changes that come when we begin our walk with the Lord. A lot of us grow up with it. Myself, I was 27 when I came to the Lord. So I was a lot like you, young man, just trying to figure this all out. So what changed for you?
Yeah, nothing immediately. I think with time, I was able to rein in my response to playing time and starting and competing fairly. I'll be honest, and it's embarrassing to admit, but I was of the mindset before I became a believer, if you weren't cheating, you weren't trying, right? Yeah. You had to do whatever it took to win. And that was kind of so ingrained in who I was. The first couple of years, it was all about breaking those bad habits. And thankfully, I was surrounded by a bunch of men that would keep me accountable, being like, hey, man, that's not ultimately how we want to react. That's not how we want to respond. And most importantly, that's not what God would want you behaving like. So it was breaking habits week in and week out over time, and to where finally it kind of the light bulb goes off at some point where it's like, man, this is such a better way to play, such a better way to live life. And just so freeing, to where what I coach our girls now, I had to experience myself in my own life to be like, wow, playing in freedom and joy is something that can be attained, and boy, does it make it that much sweeter when you're playing and living that way.
When you transitioned from playing to coaching, was that a difficult sort of pivot for you, or was that sort of natural for you to kind of go into coaching the sport that you played for so many years?
Yeah, it was natural for me. I knew I wanted to do it even when I was in college, getting my undergrad. I kind of had a sense, man, I just love the game. I love the X's and O's. And, I then saw that as an opportunity to impact lives. Although I must say my first several jobs weren't in faith-based soccer environments. So your ability to impact was a little bit, you had to be more strategic. You had to be very careful about how you shared. And it was primarily, relationally built. You're going to be able to build that bridge to get the opportunity to eventually share with these players where, I had an epiphany. This is over 8 years ago. Now this is 9-10 years ago. I'm recruiting in Dallas, Texas. And I'm with a friend of mine, a strong believer. Another friend of ours had just won a national championship. And I posed my friend this question. I'm like, hey, if we polled 10,000 people on the streets of Dallas, would they know this coach's name? My buddy's response was like, no, they probably wouldn't. And then at that point, I'm like, what are we chasing after? So here we are, we're coaching, trying to work our way up the soccer corporate ladder. But if I'm being honest, we're involved in a sport that, is pretty insignificant in the landscape of American sports. So if I'm going to be doing it, I want to do it for a reason that's way greater than just winning soccer, because the best of the best, this guy won a Division I national championship and no one would know who he was on the streets of Dallas. So that kind of, at that point in my life, I've been coaching for quite a few years. I said, you know what? I just want to be where the Lord is. I don't care if it's Division I, II, III, NAIA. I'm going to start chasing after that to where I can marry, kind of the sports ministry side that I had, the background there, and coaching. And ultimately that led me here to Lipscomb, to where I've been able to put it to practice. And it's just been, man, it's been the funnest, that's not a good word. It's been the most enjoyable, time of my life in coaching, because it's so much richer, so much deeper, so much better. And, we're having success too, which that's just the cherry on top.
You can say funnest here, Coach. That's okay.
Can I? Thank you. Sorry, guys.
Hey, man, absolutely. I wasn't a grammar major or any kind of English major either, so I'm with you. Last couple of questions here with Kevin O'Brien here on Sports Spectrum. So I love asking this question to coaches, because you do so much of part of your life is, if not majority of your life, if not your job, is pouring into others. And it's one thing to give and to give and to give, but if we're not receiving or filling our tanks up, that can be empty really fast and not have us be as valuable as we can for God's purposes. So for you, how do you stay poured into? Who pours into you? What are some ways that you stay filled up with the Lord?
Yeah, that, I've experienced that myself. I think the first couple of years here, I was so invested in trying to make the team better that I forgot the reality that, hey, if I wasn't doing well in my own relationship with the Lord, then that was just going to trickle down through the players that I'm trying to impact, therefore having less impact. So I certainly experienced that personally. But then even within our own athletic department, we've got some really, really strong believers. We've got a associate athletic director, ex-basketball coach, who is maybe one of the most godly men I've ever had in my life. We have a director of spiritual formation who, we do a Bible study once a week where we can kind of unplug from the coaching and just say, hey, let's kind of challenge each other in these other areas of our lives, whether it's, family and raising children and, being a good husband and just being a good person. So get challenged that way. I also have some coaching friends that when I go recruiting, these are believers that we've been doing life together for 5-6 years. We're gonna stay in the same hotels. We're gonna eat at the same restaurants together because we need it. We need to keep each other accountable. We need to kind of keep each other on the straight and narrow and encouraging each other, to be doing the right things in our own lives, to be doing the right things with our teams, and ultimately staying connected in fellowship with the Lord. So I've been able to create some friendships within the Division I coaching landscape that have really, really been beneficial. And I pray that I would have been of value to them as well. And then also just within our athletic department, when you're surrounded by people that love Jesus and are walking well with the Lord, it's just easy to try to, or to be involved in their lives. And that kind of keeps you inspired.
So with, a great season of life, it sounds like that God has you in, there's still things that we got to improve on. Like that's the coaching motto with your players. You're never reaching to where you want to reach, even when you win it. It's like, no, we got to come back next year and do it again. So you need to work on things. What do you need to work on for you, Coach, as a believer in Christ? What's the thing that God's been impressing on your heart to kind of seek him more for in this journey?
Yeah, I would say humility is always something I feel like God is impressing on my heart. Like, hey, this ain't you, man. You need to understand that first and foremost, and probably just transparency, vulnerability. I think it's easy for me to kind of just try to keep it in and to not let people understand when I'm hurting or when I'm disappointed or when I'm frustrated or angry. Those kind of emotions are real. And if I do keep it in, it's ultimately not going to go well in the future. But being transparent, being open with my staff, with my players, when I make mistakes, owning those mistakes, like those things go a really long way in terms of developing relational depth. And I think that's been part of our secret sauce. If I'm being honest, we're not the most talented team you'll see playing, but there is a togetherness and a unity that's knitted in the Lord that makes us exponentially better. I don't know. Yeah, I can't quantify whether it makes us 2% better, 5% better, but we're better because of it. And I know for me in my own life, if I'm not being open, transparent, vulnerable, that's only going to hinder what we could be for the Lord as a program.
I like that. Developing relational depth. I think that's a good piece of advice that we'd all want to kind of instill into our journeys, especially as believers. All right, last question, Coach. And I think this is a question, I don't normally ask this as the last question, but I like it because I think for you, as I'm listening and hearing your journey, what would be the one piece of advice or encouragement that you'd have for the Kevin O'Brien just starting out in coaching, whatever that is, 20 years ago or so, that you see and now this is what it would have been like? Here's my encouragement for you. What would that have been?
Yeah, it's pretty simple, and it kind of ties into my last answer is that, your players will give of themselves so much more if they know you genuinely care about them. Like the X's and O's, they might be like, all right, the guy knows the stuff, but if he doesn't know that we care genuinely about what's going on in their lives outside of soccer, you're never going to get the most out of your players. And I think for me, that would be, if I could have known that getting into it, it would have saved me several years of banging my head against the wall. Because that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to impress them with my knowledge of the game tactically, that I had a great understanding of how the game works and how to be successful and how to, outdo the opponents. But in the end, that can only get you so far. It's really when those walls come down and I think the players would tell you they love our mission trips because I'm not their coach. I'm just a brother in Christ serving alongside them, arm in arm, and they see me. And they see my emotions raw and unfiltered. And that, I think, gives them an insight into who I am as a person. And then ultimately that gives them a greater desire to play for someone who's real, and I think that would be my advice. Just be an open, what's the word I'm looking for? Just let them in. Don't try to impress them with X's and O's. Let your players in, and they're going to give more of themselves for the team.
He is Kevin O'Brien, Lipscomb women's soccer coach, 2019 and 2018 Atlantic Sun tournament champions. Coach, thank you for being here on the show. Let's get you back on. Love to talk more about the mission trips that you guys have and seek a little more deeper into all that you're doing for the Lord there at Lipscomb. This has been great. Thanks for joining us here.
Man, I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Good stuff there from Kevin O'Brien, Lipscomb women's soccer coach. And listen, he's got a good thing going on there. 2 straight Atlantic Sun tournament championships. Lipscomb women's soccer coach Kevin O'Brien. Many thanks to Kevin for being here and joining us on Sports Spectrum. And listen, just want to take a second to say Happy New Year to you all. 2019 was one of the more amazing years that I've seen working in Sports Spectrum and working in sports ministry. We've had over 2 million page views on our website. We celebrated over 1 million downloads on this podcast. Our magazine subscriptions are going up, and we encourage you to continue to subscribe to our Sports Spectrum magazine. The pillar of this ministry is founded and stems from the magazine that started in 1985, and so subscribe there. It's $18 for an entire year. You can get that over at sportspectrum.com. But we just are so thankful to you for helping make Sports Spectrum what it is. We hope you like this podcast. We hope you've enjoyed the conversations that we brought you. We're going to continue to bring you these conversations in 2020 and maybe even bring you in these conversations in a different light in different places. We'll see about that. But we also launched our Football Sunday podcast, which is out there now, and you can subscribe to that and listen to those stories, first-person, faith-driven stories from the athletes themselves in professional football, called the Football Sunday podcast, so make sure you're subscribing there. But really just want to reflect on 2019 and what an amazing year it really was. God has been so good to us here at Sports Spectrum, and through you all, God is doing amazing things through this ministry. And again, we just say thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing and posting and all the articles and all the guest suggestions. You've been awesome, and we love you guys. We really do. So we just want to say Happy New Year. Here's to an amazing 2020, and thank you all so much for listening to us here at Sports Spectrum. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I hope you have a great rest of your year, and we'll see you in 2020 here on Sports Spectrum.